Shall I start again? Because then I've got a microphone, then any members of the public joining us would be able to hear me welcome them to the Cabinet meeting on Tuesday, the 16th of January. And for me to say, do we have any apologies? I don't believe we do, because I believe we have everybody here that we're expecting.
Yes.
So thank you very much. In which case, that takes us on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of December. You've already had those. Are you happy to approve those as a correct record of the minutes? Yep, no dissent. That's fantastic. So I've already got those here. And okay, and that one.
Yep. Thank
Check.
you. Yep.
Okay, so that's done. Thank you. Item 2 then is members' interest. Does anybody have any disclosable pecuniary or registrable or non-registrable interests to declare? No. Go swiftly through the agenda this evening then. Item 3 then is the civil parking enforcement update. And I'm looking to Councillor Taylor. Is this you? She's about to turn her microphone on. I hope she's going to say yes.
It is.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll put my goggles on first. So this report is just an update on the progress of the delivery of civil parking enforcement within Huntingdonshire. It covers go live, warning notice approach, and the CPE stakeholder briefing, which is really an essential part of it, because we need to make sure that towns and parishes and residents understand what CPE is. And it's also it covers the expected go live date and signing of the patrol agreement, which is right at the end of the report. I will, for the benefit of the residents that may be watching, explain briefly what the CPE is. So it's civil parking enforcement. It's sometimes referred to as decriminalisation of parking, which is a process which decriminalises, that's a really hard word to say, a number of on-street parking offences, enabling them to be enforced as a civil matter by a local authority like ourselves. At present, and until CPE is established, these offences may only be enforced by the police in Huntingdonshire, which is the case now. Just for a little bit of information, CPE isn't sort of a new phenomenon. It's something that's happened over England. In fact, there's only 5 out of 327 areas in England not designated as a civil enforcement area. And I think 3 of those 5 are actually in Cambridgeshire. It went to overview and scrutiny. We had some good questions. One again was on the communication with our towns and parishes and residents. This report is really good information for now for our residents to read. I don't know if it's wise to go out just yet with everything, because we've still got a lot to do. We have got in here, we've got a delay. It's only of about 4 months, and it has nothing to do with CCC, Cambridgeshire County Council, or Huntingdonshire District Council. It's to do with the fact that it's got to go to Parliament, and that is the reason. And we know that there's going to be a general election, probably at the latter part of this year. One of the panel members said, could this be a problem? Our officer said, probably not, but it is a risk. And I did say that I think we need to be aware of that risk, and it would be foolish if we weren't aware. But we are hoping to go live January 2025. So we've got a year to get everything in place, and yeah, I am certainly looking forward to it, because I only the other day walked down one of my local roads and stopped to talk to my residents who were squeezing in between a car and a fence, and it's just inconsiderate parking and illegal parking. So I will be really looking forward to this coming into force.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. And unless you know something we still don't quite know when a general election is. I was noting Councillor Wakeford thought perhaps you had the inside line there. But yes, I think it's certainly prudent, and it was a very sensible question to be asked around. There could be some things that we may need to account for that we don't know the entire dates for. But I think that parliamentary delay is important to note. The communication, obviously, there will be a much wider communication strategy. So this being in the public domain at this time is perfectly acceptable. But I think in terms of sharing the wider messaging with residents, I agree it might be prudent to wait until we are a little closer to the implementation. And I note your comment about car parking, and I noticed on Facebook today Huntingdonshire Police have in fact taken some action in Huntingdon today and ticketed some vehicles, but I'm hoping that we will be able to do more when this comes into place. So are there any comments or questions? We've got a series of recommendations to look at in a moment, but Councillor Sanderson?
Thank you, Chair. I warmly welcome this report, and thanks to Councillor Taylor and the team for steering this through the process, because I think it's something we'd all like to see. Ideally, we know the pressures on the police time. I guess we're going to have to procure, aren't we? We need to make sure the signs and lines, which is no easy task. Every sign and line in Huntingdonshire effectively is legal, because otherwise we can't enforce it, and we need to procure for that. That's, I understand, likely to happen quite soon. We'll need to go through the due process, of course, and then when that's done, we'll know a little bit more about where we are with this. But as Councillor Taylor said, there need to be parliamentary order, and depending on when the general election is, it could happen before that, or it could happen at the same time. We don't know.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Yeah, the procurement, I'm not sure exactly when it's going to be procured, and looking at the tenders, it's something that we've taken on ourselves, that we've had permission from Cambridgeshire County Council to do, that we will look at our own procurement, because it's going to hopefully fit in with our budget. The date that all the work, so once we're out to procurement and we have a tender, the works must be completed by September of this year. So whoever gets the tender will have that timeline to work to. It will be up to them to deliver that programme as they see fit, but they have a deadline of September 2024.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Chair. I think this might be up there with dog fouling as one of the most talked about topics that, when I'm talking to local residents, inconsiderate parking is absolutely the bane of so many people's lives. And while I think, the communication strategy is really important, that as these changes come through, I think it's really helpful also just to have the kind of this potted information about, because people are saying, when's this thing happening? And it's felt like it's about a year away for a long time for a lot of people. So it's really helpful to have a date. Let's kind of keep reviewing that and make sure that all of our local members know, so we keep everyone updated, because I think for so many people this won't come soon enough. They're looking forward to having us bit of control. It's something that we've always had to say, yeah, we'd love to change the situation as it currently is, and we have to wait until the CPE comes along. So it's great that it's kind of coming over the horizon. I'm sure lots of people are going to welcome it with open arms.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a helpful report, and no wish to repeat things colleagues have said. Just to pick up that point around timing, as Councillor Taylor picked up from the scrutiny discussion, and Councillor Sanderson did touch on. I think we can be clear that government. We are in the hands of government and the parliamentary timetable about submitting this nationally. This further delay is linked to that. Government controls the window that it's given us to submit. Government controls the parliamentary timetable, and government also controls when it calls the general election. So it feels not beyond the wit of public authorities in the country to ensure that this can get through. I'm quite sure government recognises the importance of civil parking enforcement in Huntingdonshire, and those with friends in government, I'm sure, are relaying that message as well. But I think Councillor Taylor is right, of course, that government has not been unknown to sort of do one thing with one hand nationally and another with the other. So to bear this in mind as a risk, I think is absolutely sensible. But as I say, it is in government's power for it not to happen. So I have every confidence that we will be able to work through on the revised timescale that we've been given.
Councillor Ferguson.
I think it's worth noting that what we're doing, we are the exception, not in that we're applying for civil parking enforcement, but we're one of the few districts who haven't got it. If you Google, for residents who might be watching, if you Google civil parking enforcement map, you'll find a map which has I think at the moment 4 dots on it, 5 dots on it across the whole country. Huntingdonshire is one of those currently at the moment as well. I think that once this is done, there's going to be 3 left. And all of those islands, including the Isle of Ely, and because East Cambs is not going forward. I did note in the press, though, Councillor Taylor, that Fenland, who are ahead of us in the civil parking enforcement queue, are having some doubts now, or there were some problems with funding. Is that something that we're likely to experience, or do you understand what happened there and what's the difference between our situation and their situation?
Thank you, Chair. Not wanting to delve too much into Finland's problems, I think it has to do with the county council contractors. So hence why we are going out to procure our own to get a better deal.
So I'm very relieved to hear that you're going to get a best deal for Huntingdonshire residents. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Unless there's anybody else signalling, I think we've given that a good consideration. I personally am very keen because I was one of the ones who stood up in this chamber about 9 years ago and said, could we do this? So the answer is it's been a long wait, but we're getting close, which is fantastic news. Thank you. And please thank the team. We have a number of recommendations before us tonight on page 11. Does anybody see any reason why we can't take them en bloc? No, everybody's comfortable with making that decision. So I suppose for pertinence, I really ought to read them aloud. So bear with me because we've got A to E. So A is to note the work undertaken to date and the preparedness of HDC and CCC to apply for decriminalisation of parking in Huntingdonshire against the previously approved timescales. That's not easy to say. Note the new expected go-live date is determined by the Department for Transport's capacity constraints outside of the control of both Cambridgeshire County Council and Huntingdonshire District Council. Endorse the proposals set out in section 4.4 for go-live and warning notice approach. Endorse the proposals set out in section 4.5 for CPE stakeholder briefing and update approach. And finally, to endorse the signing of the patrol agreement as set out in section 4.6 by the Assistant Director for Strategic Insight and Delivery. Can I have a show of hands in favour of those recommendations, please? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. They're passed. Councillor Taylor, please pass our thanks to the team and express our keenness to see this resolved. And for those of you who are watching who have a link back into Parliament, please would you pass that on too. That moves us on then to the next item this evening. And I just need to scroll back to the top of my agenda, which is the biodiversity strategic sites. And I think this might be, I'm looking, is this Councillor Davenport-Ray? Thank you. And the reason I paused slightly was I didn't know whether it was cross-portfolio, but you're obviously going to lead us on this. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, both Councillor Taylor and I have been working on this, but I'll present it for this evening. So first of all, why is this being brought to us? Why are we working on it? To give you some perspective, the UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries on the planet. And recent studies have shown that 1/6 of the species in Great Britain are threatened with extinction. So this is why this is such an important topic in our country, and I think it's important for Huntingdonshire to be tackling it as well. So the topic that this covers is what we call nature recovery, and that term means humans supporting nature to bounce back from the effect of humans. So what we have done on the planet have affected the plants and animals that can live here now, and how are we going to support them to recover from that effect? I'd also point out in the report, there's a couple of mentions of 10% as a goal for biodiversity net gain. That specific requirement stems from the Environment Act. We do have a biodiversity net gain mentioned in our local plan, but just as we will soon be expecting new planning applications to be demonstrating that type of gain, we also can, of course, put that on all of our own work, our internal council land, and our plans, and seek to do even better than 10% wherever possible. So before you is specifically what's called our HDC strategic site biodiversity enhancements. And so these are sites that had to fit into a very specific criteria. So first of all, land that's owned by HDC, plots that are large enough for strategic gains in plant and animal life. So in many cases, sites that can provide strategic links for animals to migrate. And you may have noticed in some of the lists of the sites, because of these requirements, there aren't very many smaller or rural sites, places like Warboys or Yaxley. That's simply because they don't meet the criteria for this specific project, but we certainly hope to see applications from areas like that in some of the other elements of our biodiversity work, which I can talk about more later if you would like. The funding for this project is provided by a grant from the Combined Authority. And this project represents Huntingdonshire working at the forefront of this topic in advance of some of our peers. And one of the reasoning points behind us receiving the grant is that we are designing a method that can be replicated by others across the Combined Authority area and perhaps even farther abroad than that as well. So there are some recommendations here, and what we're being asked to recommend is the order in which we're going to prioritize improving the biodiversity on these sites. You can see what that order is. The biodiversity on all of these sites is important, but we do need to be strategic about which order we tackle them in. And so that's why we've undertaken this process. I think I will leave it at that and let my colleagues ask me questions. It's a topic I'm very excited about, so feel free to ask away.
There's your offer, Cabinet. Who would like to ask? Councillor Ferguson, thank you.
So thank you. I'm very excited about this because the concept of biodiversity net gain was one that I've criticised often because it's quite difficult to measure biodiversity, isn't it? So I'm relieved to see that you've done that in this paper as well and gives us a basis to see how much we're going to improve. So I'm always in favour of the principle of biodiversity net gain, but being able to measure it is the difficult thing in all this as well. But the question is, on the St Neots prioritisation, I see that Priory Park, which is mislabelled as Priory Road, is above Barford Road Pocket Park. Now, I'm not an expert, but Priory Park to me would seem to be not as biodiverse as Pocket Park, which is like a wildlife reserve. Is that a deliberate choice? Is that we want to add biodiversity to kind of the parks which are not left to nature so much? So yeah, Priory Park at the moment looks like quite a manicured park with some nice kind of biodiversity bits around the outside. Does that make sense?
I go to the first part of your question first about measuring biodiversity. I think not only is it technically difficult, but it's emotionally difficult as well. So to think about nature, what numbers do we want to put on it? What measures better? What measures worse? That's quite difficult. And across the country, councils are struggling with this, and that's linked to a lack of supply of ecologists and people with ecology skills. So one of our approaches that our officers have been leading is trying to build our own Huntingdonshire skill base in ecology. And so we've been working closely with Anglia Ruskin University to bring in graduate ecologists who can have peers and mentors in other authorities who have more experience than them, but that we can build up our own workforce in that area. And that's been working really well, and that's reflected in this report. In terms of how sites made into short-term versus medium or long-term, one of the considerations is what is the baseline biodiversity of a site, but that's not the only consideration or a more weighty consideration than others. all those things have been considered here. So there's the baseline score of what the biodiversity is. There's also the potential that you might want to take into account as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to come in? Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Chair. Mine was slightly on the understanding the units as well, because I do believe when you presented this to overview and scrutiny, that was one of the questions from one of the members is, what is a unit? How do we work that out? And actually, I was sitting just over there thinking, I'm glad you asked that, because yeah, how do we know what a unit is and what does it mean? I wasn't sure whether there was an action through overview and scrutiny to bring that back to members to, yeah, so we understand what it is, because I think this is going to be featuring a lot in our lives, and it would be just good to understand what that unit means.
So measuring biodiversity is something that people across the country are learning at the moment. And so you can get a degree in it at Anglia Ruskin University if you want to know the fine detail. But yes, so coming out of scrutiny, one of the things we're going to do is have a learning session for all members, not just that scrutiny committee, about biodiversity units and how it's calculated. It's quite complex, but it's also important for all of our planning committee members to understand as well, because that's going to be so important in planning. So it's more complicated than just how many square meters do you have multiplied by how many species can be there. And I'm going to leave it to the ecologists to explain it to all of us very soon.
Thank you. Councillor Mickelberg, you're indicating, and then Councillor Hassel.
You mentioned earlier about smaller or projects that are too small to be covered by this. What might we be doing instead of those? And does alternate land management tie into any of those projects?
So I think perhaps I should give you a wider picture of what's happening in the biodiversity area across our region. So there are really four things going on at the same time. So the first is local nature recovery strategies. So this is something that's also been implemented by the Environment Act. It's funded by DEFRA, and in our area, it's being managed by the Combined Authority. So across all of the Combined Authority, all the local authorities have to work together to define what are our habitats, what are our landscapes, and then literally prioritize them, which is going to be the hardest part. So which ones need our attention the soonest? So that is a region-wide project, which is being worked on. And hopefully you will have seen in your inbox today an invite from one of the county officers to describe for us exactly what that means. So that's one element of the four. The second is alternative land management, which you picked up on. So that is a scheme which I've brought to scrutiny before. I'm going to bring them an update again. This is an operational project that was brought through our operations department and their idea to put forward, where we leave some areas of amenity grass to long grass. And we have seen an increase in species in those sites where they have been surveyed. So that's funded via our annual revenue budget. We haven't had an external grant for that, but it's been successful, and so we're going to carry on. Then the strategic sites, which is in the paper, which we have before us. And then the fourth element is Huntingdonshire's community biodiversity grants. So when the Combined Authority funded us, there were two arms to what they were funding us to do. One is the strategic sites that are in front of you, and the other is us being open to communities coming to us saying, we'd like to improve the biodiversity on a small site in our community, help, financial help, and the help of our ecologists. So that's going on at the same time. So just now there's a window open if local communities want to apply, and let's say a parish council has a plot of land they want to improve the biodiversity, they can apply right now, and then our ecologists will visit the site and look at what the possibilities are to improve the biodiversity there. So we're sort of trying to cover off lots of different topics regionally and then within Huntingdonshire, and I would say 3 out of those 4 topics are things that, like I said before, we're doing in advance of some of our peers.
Thank you, Councillor Hassel.
Thank you, Councillor Davenport-Ray. I think actually you kind of answered the majority of my question with the latter part of yours, because it's our object is obviously not just to spend ourselves, but it's to enable and to facilitate as well. So I was going to ask, whether people like the Friends of Paxton Pits and things like, because it seems to me that the challenge for us is not just measuring the biodiversity of our little relatively small plots of land, is to enable and facilitate the whole of our community to be looking at biodiversity, valuing biodiversity, and making a difference. So I think you answered my question, but it's nice to be able to comment on something that I think is a really worthwhile proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Hassel. Councillor Wakeford and then Councillor Pitt.
Thank you. Just reflecting on comments from scrutiny, it sounds like discussion around community involvement came up a few times. So I was tempted to invite you to reassure residents, Councillor Davenport-Ray, that sort of this hasn't somehow been produced in a box. But to be honest, I think your answer to Councillor Mecklenburgh address that, so we can probably park that. But unless there's anything further you wanted to add about community involvement.
I will add something further. So the paper before you is about strategic sites, but those are sites where there can be community involvement as well. So for example, Berman Park is on the list in St. Ives, and Neil Sloper, the director who's involved in this project, and I have been to St. Ives and been to a community meeting where we talked to some of the local groups who are interested in this topic about, how do we work with them in the future? What do they want that space to look like? How do they want to balance the mix between use by people and use by nature? And so even though it's our land and our strategic sites, we want to create places that have that balance of the use of people and use by animals.
Thank you. Councillor Wakeford, were you indicating you wanted to come back in? Sorry, I wasn't sure.
Thank you. No, just otherwise to mention sort of in interests of clarification and caution in these matters, in terms of interests, that it strikes me that some of the sites listed are, of course, in the market town of Huntingdon, in which I'm a councillor. So I just wish to draw attention to that. I don't think it counts as an interest in any meaningful sense under the rules, but and clearly colleagues around the table represent other areas in which green spaces are listed, but the chief executive appears to be motioning to come in, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Wakeford. I think for transparency, the sites are located within your ward, but individually you don't derive any personal benefit that's any greater than any other resident in your ward. Therefore, there is not a personal interest that would require that declaration.
Thank you for that clarification. I suddenly had feared that there may be few of us left in the room given the nature of Cabinet, but thank you for that. I have Councillor Pitt and then I have Councillor Ferguson waiting. And Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much. It's really great report and really interesting debate this evening. I'm just thinking for residents that might spot the name of their local park on the very helpful chart on page 6 of the report, can you give us a sense of what they might expect to see that's different in the next perhaps year, and then perhaps in further down, in 10 years' time?
So I think what's really important is that for each site, it will be different. So what the ecologists have looked to find is what are the unique points of those parks, and so which habitats should we be supporting for different species in each area. So that might be if something's more suited to aquatic wildlife being influenced, then perhaps it's dredging a pond, like in Spring Common in Huntingdon. Whereas in, let's say, Priory Park in St. Neots, we have an opportunity to utilize what in the past would have been called a dead tree. It has a lot of opportunities for wildlife. So it's going to be different at each site. But if they have questions, they should look, if residents have questions, if they watch the biodiversity page on our district council website, they will see more information as well as contact details where they can ask. And I would also use this opportunity to ask residents for help. Our ecologists have been working with an app developer, and the app is called iNaturalist. And the iNaturalist app can be used to take a picture of anything. It identifies the species, plant or animal, and it geolocates where that was found. So people who are enjoying our green spaces, if they would help us map what species exist already there, that will help us develop what we want to support in future. So that's the iNaturalist app.
Thank you. And I can see councillors tempted to have a look now. Can you wait to the end of the meeting? Oh, look, Councillor Taylor's demonstrating. Councillor Ferguson and then Councillor Taylor, please.
So, firstly, I wanted to point out that Councillor Pett and I represent a ward which is named after the park. So we represent the St Neots Priory Park and Little Paxton ward as well, which we're very proud of. And we do take lots of benefit from the park, but not more than any other residents, I don't think. It's less of a question, more of observation, is that there could be perceived to be some conflict, couldn't there, between nature and public use in these parks. But your example of the tree was a really good one. I'm thinking back to the ALM pilot study we've run this year as well, which in beginning caused some consternation amongst some residents. But I think the opportunity to interact with biodiversity and learn about it has helped us all go. And I think some of us who grew up in an era of perfectly manicured parks are getting used to having parks which are less manicured but more alive. And so, yeah, it's something I really welcome. And it's the whole ALM experiment has helped resolve some of that conflict in my mind.
Although ALM is not what we're deciding on today, I would add a few points to that. One is anecdotal. Having been to St. Neots Town Council recently and discussed ALM with them, some of the older members of the council expressing their enthusiasm that they'd been able to take their grandchildren to some green spaces and see insects that they had not observed for several decades. But at the same time, I think in our first year of ALM, we obviously didn't get everything right. And so right now is the opportunity for residents and members to feed back to the operations team or me about long grass areas that you might want to be mown differently, maybe a different side of it mown, a different side left long, new spaces that you think that it would work with, or even spaces where you think that didn't work at all. Because the best thing we can do is just iteratively improve the project and make sure, like you said, we have a balance of space for people and for nature.
Thank you very much. That brings me on to Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Not to be negative on it or anything, but yes, it's great having this 1.3 million from the combined authority. You have touched on it slightly. My concern is that when that money has gone, then what? What are we going to be left with? Is this going to be something that we carry on and embed within our council open spaces, or is it just something that will lapse and go back to as it was?
I think in many ways, what we're learning to do is to manage sites in different ways. So not necessarily in more expensive ways, but we're using the funds at the moment for the ecological skill and knowledge to learn new ways to manage places. And in terms of the funding for this specific project, the Combined Authority is going through their budget process just as we are now. I have made an application to extend this particular project. We'll have to wait for the next few months and through their budget process to see whether that will happen. But I think not only has it been successful so far, but we now are in the teaching phase. So how can we be teaching our peers how to do this as well? And I think in some ways we'll be making changes that we make the change now, using the funding for now, that will literally thrive on its own going forward. Hopefully, now that humans are changing the way that they interact with nature.
So there's no more questions, but Councillor Davenport-Ray, can I then just ask a question on the back of that? That sharing bit, obviously we've got other people who own land and open spaces, some of our towns and parishes. In some cases, other community groups own bits of land. So in the sharing, I'm presuming that we might be thinking about how we share our learning with them in terms of what they could do within their own spaces.
The Combined Authority grant had two arms. So the one that's before you here, and then the other is the community grant scheme. And what we found was that if there was a parish or a landowner who really wanted to take an active role in increasing biodiversity, they often didn't know where to start or what they should physically do to increase biodiversity. So one of the most important elements of that community grant scheme is that our ecologist visits, does a site assessment, and then comes up with options of what they could do and how they could do it. And that's sort of the most important part, that even if they decide not to go ahead, they have out of the scheme a plan of what they could do in the future as well if they don't have the budget for it this year or they don't have the scope for it. So that's sort of how we're attempting to knowledge share, as well as in our annual climate conversation when many of these organizations come to us and we have the opportunity to share things with them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davenport-Ray. Then if we're content, we now have on page 22 another long list of recommendations, which I don't think is deliberate in terms of trying the chair's ability to read the long list. Again, is anybody have any issue if we were to consider taking them en bloc? No? Okay. So again, for clarity, because I appreciate not everybody watching will necessarily have the papers in front of them, they come in two blocks, and I will read through them. The first set of recommendations are to approve the following delivery schedules for planned biodiversity enhancement work in HCC strategic sites. So in the short term, tranche 1, years 1 to 2 block is Hillrise Park in St Ives, Priory Park in St Neots, and Spring Common in Huntingdon. In the medium term, tranche 2, 3 to 5 year project group is Barford Road Pocket Park, let me get it correct, in St Neots, Stukely Meadows Nature Reserve in Huntingdon, and Sapley Playing Fields in Huntingdon. And then in the long term, tranche 3, which is the 5 to 10 year group, we have Hinchingbrook Country Park in Huntingdon, Riverside Park in St Neots, Oxmoor Urban Park in Huntingdon, Burman Park in St Ives, Paxton Pits in Little Paxton, the Thicket in St Ives, and Holt Island in St Ives. And then the second recommendation, to endorse a decision to commission a delivery partner to lead on the design, consultation and delivery of the work. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. So that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. In which case, councillors, at 7:38, we have concluded tonight's business. Thank you for joining us this evening. We wish you all a good evening. Thank you very much.